Welcome back and thank you for staying with us. On Tuesday, the federal government approved the immediate reopening of 4 land borders, which include Seme in the southwest part of the country, Ilela in the northwest part of the country, Meitagari in the northwest, and Mfun in the south-south part. Well, if you watched the news on that day, you would have seen the jubilation at some of these borders. And I was wondering why there was so much jubilation. What was going on? What had been going on that could not go on in the, 1 year that the borders were closed? The borders were closed last year in order to curb smuggling and other illicit border activities. The question is, has there been any change, and how is this going to affect our economy especially? Well, to help us look at this morning, we have the Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Mr. Muda Yusuf, who joins us virtually. Good morning, Mr. Yusuf.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you very much. So all that jubilation at the border, what was causing all that jubilation? Is it that our economy is going to improve or what?
Yeah, thank you very much. First, for border communities, the lifeblood of their economies is the cross-border trade. That is what makes the economies of the border communities. And not just the economies of border communities, even the economies of some border states. Because a whole lot of economic activities take place across the border, which impacts on the immediate communities in the borders and even the states in which the borders are located. So I think that is one of the reasons why you had that instant jubilation. And these things affect a whole lot of micro enterprises, small enterprises, medium enterprises, most of them in the informal sector. So it's a big news to them, it's good news to them. And beyond that, what the government has done is also in line, or it aligns very well with our recent ratification of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. Because it will have been a major contradiction that on one hand, you are signing a trade treaty to promote economic integration. On the other hand, you are closing your borders. It's a contradiction. So what the government has done, I think, aligns very well with the fact that we have just ratified the African Continental Free Trade Agreement.
Okay. Mr. Thirdly, Yusuf,
there are quite a number.
I hear you very clearly, but the impression is that a lot of these activities going on in those border communities are illicit business. Illicit in quotes, please.
Well, you could say that they are illicit, but there are also legitimate businesses that are going on there. And this is one thing we have to also be cautious about in the way we manage the economy. We should not say because a few people or some people are violating a particular regulation, and we take the easy way out of shutting the doors completely. That is why we have institutions. Institutions are supposed to make sure that policies of government are effectively implemented and enforced. If we are dealing with a situation where institutions are failing, then we should not put the burden on the citizens. A lot of genuine, legitimate businesses have suffered significantly over 15 months. We have manufacturers that normally export to the sub-region. They have suffered severely because they could no longer export. We have manufacturers that source their raw materials from the sub-region. For 15 months, they could not do so. We have a lot of SMEs that also do all sorts of businesses across the board. We have transporters in an economy that is crumbling, in an economy that we are talking of recession, in an economy where we are talking of high unemployment. So these things don't add up. Yes, there may be issues about smuggling and all of that.
Yeah.
But if people have been paid to manage and police the border, has there been consequences?
Well,
Nothing.
on that, Mr. Yusuf, well, let me first of all ask you something, because you referenced something earlier. You referenced the consonance of this action of government with the signing of the AFTA agreement. But then don't also forget that we had the, of course, free trade agreement in place before that. And one of the concerns of government at the time, part of which was the reason for closing the border, was that a good number of Nigeria's neighbors, across different borders weren't particularly, being as compliant as they ought to be in line with that agreement at the time. Given this reopening now, would you say you are confident that indeed those issues have been addressed and we're not likely to go back there?
Well, I am not too confident, I must tell you. Because one of the major concerns I have about the Nigerian economy is the quality of our institutions. Because no matter how well-intentioned a policy is, no matter how well, the kind of thing you want to achieve is, if you don't have the right kind of institutions to make it happen, it will not happen. Of course, we had issues with our neighbors. They were not complying with some of the protocols. But we have a bigger responsibility on our own side to make sure that whatever is not supposed to come in doesn't come in. I take the point that, of course, our borders are porous. We have very large border, all sorts of informal rules, illegal rules, and all of that. But a lot of these things will not happen if there were no connivance, if some of the agencies have not compromised. And as we speak, there has been no consequences, nothing. All we just did was to go and close the border and now make a whole lot of innocent people suffer. And even while the borders were closed, some illegal things were still going on. We cannot be running an economy where those who are running foul of the law will be the ones that are being rewarded, while those who are complying with the laws will be suffering.
Mr. Yusuf, when you say connivance, which agencies of government are you talking about specifically?
What I'm saying is that we have agencies of government. I don't want to go into specifics. We have people who have responsibility to manage the borders. If they were up and doing, the situation will not degenerate to the point to which it degenerated to. That is a simple thing. I mean, some of these small items coming in trucks.
Mr. Yusuf, I ask that because when we had a conversation with the public relations officer of the Customs Service over, I think it was just yesterday, he was saying that, look, all kinds of arrangements have been put in place, all kinds of arrangements have been made to ensure that we do not go back to square one. That's why I ask, I mean, what kind of arrangements would you want to see to ensure that will ensure that we don't go back to where we were coming from before the border closure? That's why I was asking for that, if there were any specifics you wanted to mention.
Now, I have talked about the institutional factor. That is one of the factors. The second factor is that we need to create an economy that is competitive. The cost of production in this economy is too high. The cost of doing business is too high. And when you have that kind of scenario, the cost and the prices of your products will be very high relative to what is happening elsewhere. If you have a situation where it is costing almost 2 or 3 times to produce here compared to what is happening in neighboring countries, you are creating an environment to encourage smuggling. Because your products will become very expensive, they will not be competitive, and you are dealing with a population that are grappling with a whole lot of poverty problems. Purchasing power is weak. People are looking for what they can afford. So we need to fix our environment. We need to deal with all the factors that are making it difficult for those who are in production to produce competitively. If they're able to produce competitively, the pressure, the urge, the incentive for smuggling will reduce. So the issue or the factor of our environment, ranging from infrastructure to our institutions, to regulations, our ports, our documentation, all these checkpoints all over the place, we need to deal with those things. This is why all the time we talk about this cliche of enabling environment. It's a very, very important factor here. If the cost of production, the cost of operation remains high, it creates a competitiveness problem. And when you have that kind of problem, it creates an incentive for people to be seeking for alternative, cheaper means. Thirdly, we need to look and examine our trade policies. Trade policy is the kind of tariff that we impose on goods. It's also about what products you are imposing a ban on. We need to relate this to the capacity that we have. We need to identify what is our competitive strength as an economy. We need to identify what we are not strong in, so that you don't just go around banning things that you are not even producing or you don't have capacity to produce. And when you create that, because there are demand for some of those things, it creates a lot of pressure at the borders. It creates a lot of temptation, even for those who are manning the borders. So the trade policy environment also needs to be looked at properly. And again, we need to periodically check our policies. We need to do a honest appraisal. If you put a policy in place, 2-3 months, you step back and honestly look at how well the policy is impacting the economy. Because sometimes people will just put in place policies, we don't care whether you are achieving the results, whether you are not achieving the results, and the citizens and businesses suffer as a result. Then we need to fix our ports. There are some investors and some importers. They import through the neighboring countries, not because they are smugglers, but because the challenges in the ports are enormous. They are very frustrating. They have killed a lot of businesses, ranging from the infrastructure in the ports, to the processes, to all the checkpoints, to the traffic and all of that. They are very frustrating. And if you have some people who feel that it is easier to clear your cargo through Benin Republic, they take their cargo there and they bring it through the borders. It's not because they are smugglers. So we need to look at all the dimensions of the issue. The issue is not only about, of course, those who are manning the borders. That's a very important point. But we need to look at the dimensions of the environment in which this economy is operating, the environment in which the industrialists and producers are operating, so that we build an economy that is competitive. If you don't do that, even the CFTA that we are signed, so some businesses may have challenges, because we are going to open up the borders even more. A lot of goods will come in, not just from neighboring countries, they will come in from all over Africa. You have situations where businesses are still going through all of these problems. How will they be able to compete?
Mr. Yusuf,
These are the issues
Mr. Yusuf, in light of ACTA, how much dialoguing is going on between neighboring countries such that they're all on the same page, so that one country is not aiding illegal business into another?
Well, a lot of engagement is going on at the level of ECOWAS and at the level of the AU. There are rules of origin, which is a very important component of the AFCTA. And the rule of origin says that it is only goods that are produced in the countries that are involved, that are participating in the CFTA, that will be traded within the framework of the Continental Free Trade Agreement. In other words, it is not possible, it is not allowed, it will be illegal for you to go and bring in a product, either from Asia or somewhere, put it in your country, label it, and say that it is coming from your country. Or that the products must be substantially produced. The local content of those products must be as high as maybe 50 to 70%. before you can claim that these products are produced within the African continent. Those are the rules. But again, it is one thing to have the rules. It's another thing to have the institutions to be able to ensure the enforcement of those rules. And one of the challenges we have almost across Africa is the challenge of weak institutions. Even within ECOWAS, we had that challenge. We had the ECOWAS trade liberalization scheme that you can bring in products without duty and all of that. And we have had complaints from the custom that sometimes products are brought in from outside the continent and relabeled in ECOWAS and brought into Nigeria as made in ECOWAS. These are institutional problems. And of course, they are not peculiar to Nigeria. So these are the challenges that at the level of the AU, at the level of the sub-regional body, we need to grapple with and we need to tackle. Otherwise, these are the kind of things that can put the whole African Continental Free Trade Agreement at risk.
Yeah. Well, it's one thing to have these conversations at national levels, but then the critical market there would be the people who are going to, be involved directly about these things. For instance, there are many nations that have their capital cities in any border community or in the border communities. Consequently, at the end of the day, it has to be engagements with the citizens in those border communities. How well would you say we have done about that as a people? You know as well as I do that there are what we would call official borders, and then we'll have those, what's a number of good people, a good number of people will call those porous borders, who are just, communities, border communities all across the nation. So what kind of communication or conversations do you think we should be having with those people so that they can take ownership of the solution as well?
Well, I know that there has been some engagement between the customs and the border communities and between some other government agencies and the border communities to ensure that we support, the policies of government. All those things have been going on. But the truth is that you have to take all these issues together. If you have people in the border communities, there's high rate of unemployment, and because of wrong policies, you have thrown up incentives for people to be looking for cheap things across the border. You will not achieve much results. So it has to be a holistic thing. You have to take the engagement of the border communities.
Yeah, we will take this further, Mr. Yusuf. Just one moment. We'll take this further, when we come back from this break, because this element it's critical to the success and sustenance of the whatever achievements that we have had as far as the border closure was concerned. Do stay with us. Well, thanks for staying with us, Mr. Muda Yusuf, the Director General of LCCI, that's Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, is still with us this morning. So that conversation that we are having about the border communities, I think you kindly advise, what kind of thing we should be telling them. As you know, and as you said earlier, they were very, very excited when the reopening of the borders was announced, and you have given us some insight as to why that is. But then, those concerns would remain. Why should the borders reopen if there are illicit activities? Consequently, that is saying that maybe there is some conversation that we need to have with the border communities, especially the ones that have been opened now, that we have not heard, as well as many other communities that, are still border communities, and, they probably don't even know that there was ever any such thing as a closed border in the first place. So in the interest of national security, or in the spirit of national interest, or in the spirit of the Nigerianness that belongs to all of us, what should we be telling them? And how will they be able to take ownership? What are the things that will make them take ownership of whatever gains we have recorded as far as this border closure and reopening is concerned?
Yeah, thank you very much. Before I answer that, let me also say that it is not as if the border closure was a bad thing entirely. Now, the reopening of the land borders is not necessarily good news for everybody. I know, for instance, that the rice farmers will not be happy with the fact that the land borders have been opened. The poultry farmers will not be happy that the land borders have been opened. Those who are in the vegetable oil production are not likely to be happy. And in fact, those who are in cable manufacturing are also not likely to be happy. Because all these segments of economic operator that I have mentioned have reported a lot of improvement in their businesses as a result of the closure of the border. And that is the nature of economic policy. It penalizes some people, it rewards some people. What is important is to ensure that on balance, the economy is much better for it. Having said that, on the issue of the border communities, engagement is key. But let me say this. The real smuggling activities that happen that is hurting the economy is not by the border communities. There are big-time business people whose business, and they move these things in trucks. It's not the border, because they don't have that economic capacity to be able to do it. So there are people whose big business is smuggling. And that is why I said that our institutions need to sit up so that we ensure that we deal with all these people who are violating or who are breaching whatever rules that we have put in place. That is not to diminish the need for engagement with border communities, because all our agencies that man the borders, they operate in those communities. And they need
just one moment, Mr. Yusuf. You know, I asked that question against one particular background. Now, when we had the conversation with the Customs Service PRO, one of the things that he said that, you know, shook me, but for the exigency of time, I couldn't really interrogate it further, was that the communities, people in the communities would rather give information to other people, sometimes the people who are perpetrating some of these activities, than give it to them, the customs agents. They give it to the criminals. Well, forgive me, just trying to be politically correct. But that's what happens. So if, and so when he said that, my question, the question that first of all went through my mind was, wait a minute, something is definitely wrong with the trust quotient there. So that is why that's why I'm asking what kind of communication we should be having with them. They may not be the perpetrators, but for giving or not giving information, they would be collaborators one way or another. So that's why I'm asking, that's against the backdrop that I'm asking that question. You will remember that the president has complained, as several other people have done, about illicit arms, the illicit small arms all over the place. If the people in the border communities knew, and they knew where to give their information to, and they were able to give the information to, the borders would probably never have been closed in the first place. How do you react?
Of course, I agree perfectly with you. You're absolutely correct. We need to bring them on board, and we also need to build trust. Because you talk about the trust deficit, which perhaps may have been responsible for this kind of disposition or behavior. So the agencies in the border need to see how we can build the trust of the communities. And it depends on how you relate with them. It depends on how you also cater for their interests, to let them know that, yes, you also worry about their welfare and all of that. You need that kind of thing to happen. Just as it's happening in all these oil producing areas. Because you need community engagement, you need community support, you need to build an environment that is inclusive around you before you can achieve this kind of outcomes. So I agree with you. The customs and other agencies, because they need information, but they also must engender that kind of trust. They must inspire trust so that the border communities, we also see them as partners. The border communities, we also see themselves as stakeholders in the whole process. I think that is what needs to happen.
Well, you also spoke about another public, which is the micro, small, and medium enterprises in this, value chain that we are talking about. And forgive me for saying, but there's the likelihood that a good number of them are not even as well informed about this entire conversations that we are having as they ought to be. Many of them would be members of your body, if your chamber, if they were literate enough, and I'm sure some of them would be members of your chamber as well. So in terms of taking ownership and in the interest, in the spirit of national interest, what kind of conversation are you having with your people to ensure that one way or another, we also do not run foul of the law, and we ensure that we do not allow ourselves to get to the point where we have to close the borders that have been opened, or even close any border at all?
Well, for any business to be a member of the chamber, and in particular Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, the issues we are discussing will not be new. I mean, they are exposed enough to know about all of these issues, the rules and all of that. I mean, some of these policies of government, at that level of business, that level of awareness is there. But that is not to say that there cannot be unethical practices across any level of business. And as a Chamber of Commerce, not just LCCI, even other business associations, we take issues of business ethics seriously. While we'll engage in advocacy to ensure we have an enabling environment, to ensure that we have the right kind of policies, to ensure that the regulators are behaving well and are supporting business, we also do not condone acts of criminality or people that act in breach of the law. So where we find that kind of thing, of course, we have internal mechanisms. We have sanctions. In Lagos Chamber of Commerce, for instance, we have an ethics committee. We have a code of conduct for members. So there are internal mechanisms to deal with these things. And in terms of information, we have this information. Because whatever it is, the policy is the policy. The law is the law until it is changed. So we have a responsibility to ensure that we compel people, we encourage people to comply with the law. And anybody that does not comply with the law and brought to our notice, we also have our own systems of sanctions. So ethical business practices is one of the core principles in many business associations. So that is the way it is. But again, generally, you must also have a society where there are consequences for actions. Not just about public agencies now, even for business operators, there have to be consequences. Because if you are running a system where those who are running foul of the law are the ones that are making the most money or things like that, you are not even encouraging those who are doing businesses ethically, or people who are trying to comply with the rules. So the total administration of the law of consequence management is also important to ensure that everybody behaves the way he or she should behave as a business entity.
But Mr. Yusuf, in closing, what about the free movement of human beings across these borders? We know that there are cases of Nigerians just walking across without any documentation, and the other way around. People from other countries simply just stroll into our country as well.
No, in ECOWAS, there is free movement of people. Although that also has its own consequences from a security point of view. The passport we hold is ECOWAS passport. So if you are going to anywhere in the sub-region, you don't need visa. What you just need is your passport, and you cross. So
talking about those who don't even have passports.
Well, this is also an institutional issue. If you have people at the borders, those people should not be allowed to cross. But you need to witness the way some of these things happen at the border, where people just cross without documents, without anything. The driver will just come down, talk to some officials, and they cross. It's still an institutional problem. If institutions are effective, these things will not happen. So it is very important, apart from all these other, we need to fix institutions so that policies will be complied with, so that there will be consequences for infractions. That is where you can have a society that is stable and that is very sane.
You spoke earlier about countries being in dialogue regarding one helping the other to make sure that the activities of one do not affect the economy of the other. Are there any things in place to sanction any such country who is found, for instance, aiding smugglers?
Well, if I've not studied the ECOWAS protocols properly, but I imagine that there will be consequences, because we cannot. It is not possible to just set rules, set guidelines, and there will be no consequences for violation of those guidelines. There will be, I'm sure, but I cannot give you specifics. But at the level of ECOWAS and even at the level of AU, there will be provisions within this treaty to sanction countries that are falling out of line, that are not complying with the protocols. There will be provisions there. And it is for us as a country, or any country for that matter, to invoke those provisions to ensure that
Muda Yusuf, Mr. Muda Yusuf, Director General, Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, thank you very much for coming to shed more light on this topic with us this morning, the issue of the land borders reopening. Sunrise will return very shortly with another interesting conversation. Please stay with us.